Okay, I'm Dukes Love. I'm in economics. I teach a sequence of classes, but I'm going to talk about really three: introductory macroeconomics, intermediate macroeconomics, and a senior seminar that I teach. But thematically, I think what I'd like to emphasize overall is Samuel Beckett's motto of fail better, which is teaching is almost strategic failure. Every time I go into the classroom, I always recognize that I'm going to fail. Whatever my objective is, it's not going to work entirely perfectly. But I don't expect it to. Every time I enter the classroom, whether it's an introductory class or an intermediate class or a senior seminar class, I have a whole bunch of objectives, a whole bunch of ideas, and it's almost like pre-programmed failure. You walk into the classroom, you have a lot of stuff that you want to achieve, and half the time it doesn't work out quite what quite like you think it will. But to me, that's always been an advantage. I've always liked classes to evolve dynamically within certain parameters. So for example, if I'm going to talk about banking and the financial system, and we end up talking about the Geithner Plan and banking reform in the current financial crisis, that's good news. It keeps the subject lively. I have a very hard time actually holding on to a scripted lecture, so I don't ever use notes. I don't ever try to remember particular phrases or particular jokes. I try not to come up with canned delivery. The hope is that you envision, or at least I envision, trying to communicate to a bunch of individual students around the room, and that doesn't matter whether it's 40 students in a relatively large class, 25 students in kind of an intermediate class, or 10 to 20 in a senior seminar. It's as if I'm trying to talk to a bunch of different students in my office hours. They all have particular backgrounds. What they share is the reading for that day, so there's already common ground, and it makes me feel very comfortable if I just talk to them. And it's exciting. You're talking about stuff that's very closely related to my research, even if it's an introductory class. And it's an opportunity to actually communicate not in the kind of sterile form of a lecture per se, where it's you're not giving a wedding speech. You're talking to people, and it has to feel like it's going both directions. And the only way to make it feel like it's going both directions is for the students to feel like they have some kind of investment in the class too. So I guess my most successful classes have always been when the topic is shared amongst us, and that sounds very cliched, but the way that actually works in practice is by asking a constant set of non-yes or no questions, and forcing students, no matter how you do it, forcing students to take some kind of direct interest in every facet of what you're talking about. You shouldn't go 5 minutes or 10 minutes blabbing on. Not to say that I haven't gone 5 or 10 minutes just blabbing on. But ideally, you want to actually feel like there's a chance for the students to say something that's really going to change the course of the discussion. If students feel like they can't change the course of the discussion, it feels inevitable, as if you are just trying to elicit a set of pre-programmed responses. Not in a Socratic way, but just in a very mechanical way. I don't always achieve that, but the hope is that somehow you can get around the mechanical. I'm trying to extract a certain amount of information from you as students, and I'm going to find one clever set of questions to do that. I think it's a lot more successful to take seriously student responses and to think about them using economic analysis. So in other words, treating all the students as colleagues, effectively. They're colleagues that don't know as much, but they're colleagues that might be equally smart as a lot of your actual colleagues. And so when students have actually added a lot to my class, it's been because of some kind of open-ended nature of a question. My least successful questions in class are kind of yes or no or factual questions. Something that they could have gotten directly from the reading, something that they could have gotten directly from a textbook problem. So when I walk into the room, the way I always open up a class is by first of all just trying to provide some kind of overview of what we're going to do, and this is all usual teaching stuff. But to me, this is an opportunity for me to hone my own excitement about it. I mean, this is fun stuff. I don't teach anything that I'm not interested in. And if you don't project that, I think, to the students, you're effectively telling them that you're there as kind of a guide rather than someone that's kind of sharing in the excitement of learning about a whole bunch of relevant stuff, which is another point, which is if it's economics, if it's policy relevant, if it can relate to the news, then make it relate to the news. And not in just a cheesy short way. Everything we do in economics is practically defined. Its raison d'etre is really that we're talking about important current events using a set of tools that happen to be economics. That's an exciting that's an exciting process. It's exciting at the intro level, at the intermediate level, but it's not enough to just know yourself that it's exciting and have that inform your research. That's something that you need to communicate to a bunch of students. And how you do that is, of course, up to you. It's impossible to sort of come up with a programmed way to communicate excitement, but you have to believe that what you're talking about on that given day is worth an hour and 15 minutes of your students' time. And if it doesn't feel like it's worth their time, then you need to change what you're actually teaching during that class period. That all sounds obvious, but always ask yourself the question, why is what I'm talking about right now really interesting, and why should I actually monopolize an hour and 15 minutes of a bunch of students' times? When you have 40 students, so you have 40 students times an hour and 15 minutes worth of used time. And then sort of secondly, it's not just why is what you're teaching interesting, but why might it be hard? So I've always kind of liked the Wallace Stevens remark of making the visible a little bit harder to see. What is it about your subject on that given day that might be tricky or unusual? Why is it likely to trip them up on in exams? What's the hard stuff? And then spending a little bit more time actually highlighting that. Some of the stuff is very easy. I think students have a very easy time manipulating supply and demand diagrams. So why spend hours and hours belaboring the elasticities of slopes when that's not going to be the hard stuff? What's going to be the hard stuff is actually an intuition for why you'd care about something like elasticities. And then sort of thirdly, making it feel like you have a consistent trajectory. Where on earth are you going from the beginning of the lecture to the end? And you should end, the trajectory should really end about within 1 to 2 minutes of the terminal point of the class, and it should feel like an actual ending, not as if you just sort of trickled off. Now again, that's not something I've been able to achieve in every single class. But when I feel like I've been successful, it's almost as though you've told a consistent story that seems contained in that day. And the reason why that's important is because there are 25 of these classes, and to have any chance of remembering some fraction of what you've taught 10 years down the line, which is how I think about teaching these intro and intermediate classes, there needs to be some kind of narrative. Were you talking about saving an investment? And if so, who cares? And what was the motivating example, and what was the actual, what was the analysis in the middle, and why did it end up being an important concept toward the end? So that's hard to achieve, but there should always be some kind of arc in mind. At least I think there needs to be an arc in mind for each and every class, in addition to kind of the macro arc of the entire sequence. So thinking about the very beginning of the semester to the very end, and it should all feel cohesive, and that's not just syllabus design, it's actually in your head, it has to be related. And it's okay to draw on, I think, it's always a good idea to draw on all of the stuff that went before that lecture, so that these are sort of just kind of mental reminders. So that would really be, these would be applicable in my mind to the intro-intermediate sequence. What I do in senior seminars, whether it's successful or not, I don't know, but what I actually like to do is I treat all of my students as fellow colleagues. And the way we talk about papers is I force my students to shoulder a lot of the responsibility intellectually, to wrestle with difficult ideas. And again, that sounds kind of cliched, and it seems like it's kind of hard to systematize. But we're all sitting around reading the same set of papers. These are very smart students, and they need to be pushed. And it needs to be a safe, comfortable, at times humorous environment, but it should be one that's serious intellectually. And that means that I personally, for example, try to avoid an overly programmatic approach. So this isn't that we sit down in the papers and there's a series of questions that we've worked out ahead of time. It should really be trying to get to the heart of why a paper is interesting and how it works. Almost mechanically, you're going to pull the engine apart and try to figure out what is it that they're doing, and why does this work, and why was this a good idea, and why would this possibly be assigned as a paper. But the real challenge in the senior seminar for me has always been to make sure that I actually pick up on the actual student responses. So don't come in with this overriding objective in mind, but actually treat the course as reflecting the students' ideas. And not just my own. I have very strong views about papers, but my temptation is to just, again, babble on like I am right now about those particular views, rather than actually drawing on the students' interests. So I guess I would sort of summarize and say that the most important thing for me in teaching my classes, and again, who knows whether it works, is always treating this as a one-on-one between me and all of the students, regardless of the class size. And that would be the single most important thing, is imagine that you're having a conversation in office hours with a student trying to get an idea across. And why is that idea hard, and why is it interesting? That's what needs to be communicated, regardless of the size. That's it.